Hello, I'm Katie and welcome to Prompted, the official podcast for the writing prompt section of reddit.com, where you are prompted to write stories. And here we showcase the best of them, all with the goal of helping each other to become better writers. Today we have a very special episode for you. You've probably heard that the solar eclipse is going to be going over North America on August 21st. So we've decided, since this episode is releasing just before then, that it would be really cool to do an eclipse-based episode. So all of the stories here involve the sun, moon, or both. I'll be reading our first story. The prompt is by Evan Gow, and the story by Scott Pilgrimfan. When humanity has to leave the Earth to live on the moon, you panic. Nobody knows that you're a werewolf. Mandy, you okay in there? Asks Bill. We need to get out of here. The soldiers will be here any second now. I can hear the gunfire coming from outside and smell the scent of blood reaching through the ventilation system. I hate the soldiers who decided to attack us. I hate that I'm in charge of security here, and I even hate Bill's honest concern. Right now, it all makes my blood boil. All my mind can think about now is red fur. And it takes all my willpower to not rip the door off its hinges. Somehow, I find the strength to open the door softly, and I rush past him, ignoring his protests. My skin is itching all over, and my mouth is as dry as a desert. The wolf inside me shouldn't be reacting this way. Even though the station is on the moon, I haven't had any problems for the past few weeks. Technically, I shouldn't ever be affected. There's no way to see a full moon when you're on the moon, but ancient magic doesn't give a damn about the logic of changing planets. And now, on the night when it would be the full moon on Earth, it feels even stronger than ever before. I can feel it on the back of my throat, and I know the change is coming soon. Mandy? Bill? Anyone? I hear from the intercom. I grab the communication device and tap its screen, accidentally cracking it with my rapidly sharpening fingernail. I'm here, Tratsky. What's going on out there? I growled. I looked at the reflection in my screen, and I saw my eyes going bloodshot red. Our blaster shields have failed. They've overloaded the servers controlling our defense systems. We're basically out of options. You need to get out there now, said Tratsky. I could hear the note of defeat in his voice. We both knew that if the terrorists got control of the base, that would leave any target on Earth vulnerable. I was about to say something when I coughed up blood as my stomach began spinning fur within itself. The power of the full moon was approaching, and I couldn't hold it much longer. Pain ripped through my arms and legs. I idly cursed myself for not bringing any doses of silver to hold back the transformation, as I felt myself hungering to throw up. My body was itching, begging to be covered. Mandy? What the hell is this? Bill asked. I looked at him and saw how small and insignificant he looked, trembling there. I saw the gun on his holster and knew I could rip his gut out before he could reach for it. With the last of my willpower, I said, "Tell Tratsky to let the terrorists in." I saw his eyes widen, and he opened his mouth to question, and I snarled, "Just don't argue, or I'll have you fired from the force forever. Let them in, and then you hide in the bottom bunkers, and don't come out until the night is over, even when the screaming stops. Even when I tell you to come out, Don't come out until your Terran chrono clock says it is 11 a.m., I said. Thankfully, Bill wasn't stupid. He nodded and told Trotsky to let them in. I could see his confusion, and some small part of me felt bad, but I was saving his life. I waited till he had walked off, and I could hear him close the bunker doors several feet down. Then, I let the transformation occur. I opened my mouth wide and felt myself vomit the wolf fur. Blood and spit covered the magnificent red mane, creating quite a contrast with the sterile space station. It was a shell of a rather large wolf, and my hand stroked the fur as my mind savored the feel of it. I could hear the anti-planetary soldiers walking through the station, pillaging the base. I didn't care. I fitted my hand through the arm of the fur and felt the inside of my arm bind itself perfectly to my skin. And then, in a frenzy, I ripped my clothes off and became the wolf. Mandy, we must always be careful. My grandmother and her grandmother have always carried a dark power. And you too, seventh daughter of a seventh daughter, will have to carry it, said my grandmother. Despite being in a modern hospital, her eyes still carried the whiff of some long-lost time. Grandma, times have changed. There's nothing scientific about this seventh of a seventh nonsense. Even if there was some long-lost dark curse, science would fix it, I said. Her eyes twinkled and she laughed. Of course, my little engineer would think that. And science is useful. But our blood runs deeper than that. And magic does not always listen to logic. I opened my eyes. The clothes of my human shell were beside me, ripped open. I would have to deal with it later. I felt a sharp pain in my side. I looked up to see a piece of meat standing in front of me, holding a weapon. Look, the dog didn't even flinch, said one piece of meat. Something in my mind, though. Terrorist. I would save him for last, I decided. We must have scared those Loonians bad. They didn't even bring their pets. Another piece of meat said. She was trembling, and I could smell her fear when I stared at her. She was probably new. A small part of me remembered my friend Bill was below, and I would make sure none of the soldiers found him. After all, I prefer my dessert alive. Our second story is going to be read by LLCoolBrap. The prompt was written by DeathWish087, and the story by RiseofBubblez. Depending on the color of the moon, monsters rise. But today you are expecting a solar eclipse, and you, as a hunter, have a very bad feeling.
The city seemed desolate, everyone having locked and barricaded themselves inside their homes, in a desperate attempt to keep out the monsters that were sure to rise. Normally they were affected by the moon, the differing colours and even phases affecting what terrible creatures would come forth. Full moons typically saw vampires and werewolves prowling the lands in search of blood and flesh, whereas a new moon was notable for the dead, skeletons and zombies and their ilk. But this time, it was different. This time, the sun was not to set, but to be blotted out by the moon. And when the darkness fell upon the land, nobody knew what would rise. Thea gripped her bow as she stood there, on the edge of the city, gazing up towards the sky, as it began to dim and darken with the approaching moon. She wasn't the only one nervous. Messengers had been crisscrossing the southern provinces for weeks now, handing out orders to every hunter there was. These were relatively barren lands, filled with vast plains and few inhabitants, and so the hunters were few and far between, spread out throughout the various villages. But this needed mobilization. Everyone was to be called up regardless of whether they would have been assigned this night or not, and everyone was to be ready. Silence began to fall as the sky dimmed around them, the few citizens who were still out now darting into their homes at the last minute, and the sparse conversation between hunters finally coming to a close. The king's advisors had been predicting this for months. Not just an eclipse, but a lengthy one at that, and nobody was sure what to be ready for in this case. Finally, the light faded, the sun becoming a ring of light that surrounded the black hole of the moon. Everything was silent. Even the birds seemed to have gone dead. All across the kingdom, men and women stared up at the sky, waiting for something to happen. Nothing. The river trickled past, winding its way north from the rising slopes of the famous and quite unimaginatively named southern mountains that towered nearby like a sheer wall of rock and snow. 1 minute passed. Nothing. 2 minutes. 3. Finally, Thea began to relax, sitting down with a sigh on the edge of the small wooden palisade that surrounded the city, freshly built after the previous walls and palisades had been destroyed in the preceding months. "Hey," came a voice, calm and deep, filled with the memory of years hunting. With a smile, Thea turned her head slightly, greeting him as he approached. A middle-aged man, his hair dark and beginning to grey on the sides. This was Harold, a native of the north, a trait that could be seen in his deep-set eyes and long nose, and a long-time veteran hunter. Slowly he stepped forward and stood next to her, gazing out over plains that seemed to stretch on forever. "You think we'll see anything?" she responded, looking instead towards the mountains to her left and wondering, not for the first time, what lay down in the depths of the caves that ran down through them into the earth. "I don't know. It's been a very long time since the last eclipse, so I don't honestly think anyone knows what to expect. Maybe we'll get lucky." He chuckled, slightly nervously. After a few seconds, she finally turned to look at him. His face was badly scarred, the tokens of years of fighting monsters now engraved upon his skin, but even under the camouflage of past wounds, she could see much more. His eyes betrayed him, usually stern and cold. They showed something she had never seen before. Hurt. They were the eyes of someone who has seen too much, who has lived far too long in a world of horror. They were the eyes of someone who had been pushed over the edge, someone who had finally seen something he couldn't forget. Harold wasn't scared of the monsters. He had fought them for long enough to get over most of those fears, unlike so many. Even now unsure of what demon they may soon have to face, he wasn't scared, but he was broken. "Harold," she began. "I know what you're going to say. It's obvious, isn't it? You're going to ask me what's happened to me." She sighed. "Yes." His voice was full of emotions as he responded, like someone barely able to keep themselves from breaking down into tears. I saw something. Something I couldn't move past, something I could never forget." He took a shuddering breath. Silence. With barely a breath, Thea and Harold jumped to their feet, scanning the horizon for something. Something big. Something colossal. It seemed to echo from the distance, the ground shaking alongside it from every direction. Something was coming, its footsteps crashing to the ground, splitting and cracking the earth. But from where? Across the plains there was nothing, and the mountains seemed silent. Then it roared. Its voice rolling through the mountains and valleys, across the plains and hills. Thea drew her bow, notching an arrow in it and watching the horizon. Something stirred in the mountain range, rocks tumbling down the slopes towards the ground. Silence. Then a crash as a colossal hand reached up, gripping the top of the mountain and using that to leverage itself up. Soon after, it was followed by another, as something pushed its way through the mountains, breaking the stone apart as it moved. Almost as one, the hunters turned to face the mountains, watching as the giant's head rose above them, and it began climbing over the peaks and down into the plains. Once again, it roared, a massive, thundering, terrifying roar that was soon echoed by another and another, stretching out both east and west along the mountains. For a minute, it watched them, considering them in silence, before finally, it advanced.
Our third story for today is read by Giglomesh. The prompt is by S. Davis 2911, and the story by Ghost Write the Whip. As a child in the 1960s, you heard the phrase, "Somebody walked on my grave," after somebody shivered. While watching the moon landing, you see Buzz Aldrin step on the moon. You immediately shiver.
I clutched my side as the color drained from my face. Blood was spreading across my neatly pressed white shirt, dark and red as wine. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Be like what, traitor? The man I once called my friend unscrewed the silencer from a sleek black pistol and began to procure a black tarp from inside his trench coat. I had to give him credit. I never thought someone as unassuming as Alex had the guts to try to kill me. He was my closest advisor, after all. The scene before me blurred together in wet shapes like watercolors as I fell to the floor. I coughed. I was going to die on the moon. Buzz, he stepped. Alex crouched down to face me, his breath hot and labored. Buzz stepped? You're mad, my friend. I clawed at his chest with weak fingers. My vision was fading. On his first step on the moon, I shivered. Stepped on my grave. He laughed. Oh, you poor soul. You don't really believe in all that gibberish, do you? When Alex put it like that, it all seemed so foolish. No. I guess it was stupid, the whole shivering thing. Just an old wives' tale. He raised his eyebrows, looking at me like I was an idiot. I'm not talking about that. I mean the moon. You know that space travel is a hoax created by the US government, right? It was all a bunch of Cold War propaganda. Don't tell me I'm the only one that bothered to read the classified documents about our space program. A hoax? My words were coming softer, drops of blood flying out of pale lips with each concerted effort. Then that means... Yup, said Alex, reading my mind. They dressed Buzz up in a shiny white suit and had him take a walk through the dump. Then you're going to bury me in a dump? I rolled over in my spot at Alex's feet. He shivered. Just then, the door exploded inward, showering the room with splinters. Men in crisp black suits stormed into the room, and everything erupted into gunfire and blinding light. I heard a thud next to me. A moment later, all was silent, and I looked up. Alex was staring at me, his face cold and lifeless. One of the men crouched down to examine me. "Are you okay?" I heard him ask. But his voice was far away. It was like he was calling to me from the far end of a hallway. "Hang on, sir. It's going to be all right." Then the world went dark. I woke up some time later to bright fluorescent lights and worried voices. "Are you okay, Mr. President?" a voice asked. I recognized it as Watson, my head of Secret Service. I sat up. I was in a bed in some kind of infirmary. There were bandages around my abdomen, and pain lanced through my side when I twisted around too far. "Yes, I'm feeling better now." I paused, studying the hulking guard attending me. I wondered how much truth there was to Alex's mad ramblings about the moon. "Watson, can you have someone bring me the classified briefing on our NASA expeditions during the 60s? Watson didn't hesitate. "Right away, Mr. President." Sometime later, Watson returned, holding a manila envelope in his hand. He handed me the file, looking confused, and said, "Sir, are you sure you want to be doing this in your current health?" "I'm sure, thank you," I replied, dismissing my guard. He nodded and dissolved back into the shadows in the corner of the room. I flicked the file open and read the briefing on our first landing on the moon. I thumbed past pages of verbiage and semantics until I found a journal from a public worker embedded in the center of the file. The file shook in my hands as I read its contents. July 20th, 1969. Successfully staged the moon landing today. Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong each received a lump sum payment of $500,000 for their cooperation and discretion, leaving Area 51 later this afternoon. I put the file down. Alex was right. It was all a hoax. I looked over at Watson, lurking quietly in the corner. He had been in the Secret Service for a long time, even served as far back as the Carter era. "Hey, Watson," I started, hoping I wasn't about to sound stupid. "Do US presidents secretly get buried in Area 51 when they die?" He laughed. "Hell no, sir. Unbefitting for a president. These days, that's where we dump the bodies of war criminals and enemies of the state that we don't want the public to know about. For people that need to disappear." Suddenly, he looked up at me, a bit worried. "Say, sir, why this sudden interest?" "Oh, no reason," I assured him, although that did little to assuage the anxiety knitting its way across his brow. Watson had been close to Alex. They talked a lot. Too much. I saw them whispering quietly to each other during briefings when they thought I wasn't looking. Soon he would discover the truth too, just as Alex did. Gingerly, I took a step out of bed and landed on the floor. Watson shivered.
Our next story is narrated by myself, and the prompt is written by Dreamlight, and the story written by Aegeus. Humanity makes it to the moon in 1969. After some exploration, the astronauts discover a dilapidated moon base with the words, "Contagion inside, keep out," written on the entrance. Houston, are you getting my video? The alien structure has English and Russian writing on it. Contagion, keep out. I assume the Russian says the same thing. It does. Stand by. We're deciding how we want to handle this. Silence over the radio. Houston, are you there? Apollo, we advise you leave the structure alone. We don't know what's in there, and given that they used English and Russian, it seems pretty clear that the warning was aimed at human astronauts. We don't want you picking up some sort of virus. I'm in a spacesuit. What sort of virus could get through a spacesuit? Nothing we can think of. But what happens when you take it off? Silence over the radio again. Yeah, we're not touching this until we can draw up proper procedures for handling alien biohazards. God, that sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? The astronaut chuckled ruefully, but he knew they were right. Above all else, NASA needed to bring the astronauts home safely. And you got home safely by following procedures, not by taking risks. Even when that meant ignoring the incredible mystery the universe had seen fit to place right in front of your lunar lander. Roger, I'm leaving it alone. But let the record show that Buzz and I are the ones who discovered alien life out here. Don't let Apollo 12 get all the credit. The calm tones of mission control didn't change, but the astronaut was sure he heard laughter in the background. Wilco, get as much detail on the outside of the bunker as you can without breaching the interior. Then get back to the LEM. Wilco. The astronaut shut off the radio and began to slowly walk around the side of the alien bunker, capturing every inch of its metallic exterior. Houston, we may have a problem. What? There's a meteor impact on the south side of the structure. There's major damage. The lighting isn't too good, but... But what? Your video's fuzzy. It looks like it punched through. There's a hole in the wall. The astronaut leaned down and looked at the hole, feeling the first faint gnawings of fear in his gut. Houston, if there's something in that bunker, it got out. Our next story is read again by LLCoolBrap. The prompt is written by Happy Laugh Guy, and the response by Silent Sight. You saw the total lunar eclipse tonight, from the moon. Gazing at the red ring around the Earth, there seems to be something hiding within.
It was a huge event. NASA was streaming it, and all the news outlets were advertising this amazing total lunar eclipse. A once-in-a-lifetime event, they said. My relatives from the south were posting all their pictures over Facebook. While I was driving, I got to catch a small glimpse of the supermoon. The lower left side was just beginning to get dark. I had time. It was still an awesome sight, but I had a trick up my sleeve. I arrived at the Goddard Space Flight Center's main entrance. I just had to show my badge to enter, no more fuzz. Nice night, Mr. Gupta. Yes, indeed. How's the moon coming up? Oh, real nice. But I guess you're here to see it up close, right? That's the plan. Man, save me some pictures, will you? You know how the kids love 'em. I will if I can, you know it, Carl. Have a good one. I drove past the security entrance, parked my car, rushed inside, and took the elevator. I got to my usual post. I had been working at Goddard just for 1 year tonight. It was a coincidence, really. I was working with monitoring the LRO, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. Carl was right. The amazing pictures that we've produced from that small little satellite orbiting the moon in a selenocentric orbit were awe-inspiring. So tonight, I would make sure that it wouldn't be an exception. I logged into my station and quickly switched to the LROC payload, the wide-angle camera within the lunar orbiter. I updated the LRO orbit tracker on my second screen. The timing was perfect. It would be coming out of the dark side of the moon in a minute, although I guess at this point it was almost all dark. The first images I programmed the craft to take came out pretty dark. It was no surprise, really. The cameras weren't designed to detect those kinds of low lighting conditions. That could perhaps change if I turned on the narrow-angle cameras on board, but I thought again. I wasn't supposed to be here anyways. Tomorrow the systems engineer will have to contact my supervisor and tell him I was here. I don't care though, as long as it doesn't cause problems to the mission. The mapping of the lunar surface was coming out pretty well. Part of my tasks are to help compose a real map that astronauts can use when we return to colonize the moon. So I quickly sent some basic commands to the LRO. I told it to rotate, then point the LROC wide-angle camera to the Earth. As the automated programs were executing this maneuver, the remaining instruments would have to enter suspension mode. This way I wouldn't disrupt much of the automated tasks. I could already hear the words from my supervisor. It would be at least 1 week of disruption and setbacks, but I'm sure that he had some sort of automated alarm on his phone if anything stopped working correctly. I had to be quick. New images appeared on screen. I was starting to see the alignment that was causing the eclipse on the moon. The darkness was eerie, but the cameras were still not calibrated to see the faraway stars. This little rotating gimmick could cost the LRO a lot of energy. Its battery with no sun to power it will only last so long, and the lunar eclipse will end in about 2 hours. As long as I only take a couple of pictures of Earth and set it to rotate back immediately, I should be fine. Finally, the LRO alerted me that it had finished its rotating. The next commands were to take the pictures from the wide angle and wait. A picture from the LROC is big. It takes a few minutes for the receiver to upload them and then assign a correct picture header to display it on a regular computer. Nevertheless, I was not expecting what I saw on that first picture. Similar to a solar eclipse, the Earth showed a bright ring around it, only a bit wider and skewed. I could not really see the spots of lighting in the cities. I guess I wouldn't have expected to from this distance. The next image was being received. I sent another command to the craft asking for a wider exposure and a better zoom. Now I had a better view of what was happening. The ring of fire around Earth was ambiguous and had a certain zigzag shape. I was having a hard time figuring out what I was seeing. Had anyone seen something like this before? The images were currently previews, small thumbnails of the raw data. The original images had to be processed and compressed. Gigabytes of data crunched and converted to a few megabytes. The process was not perfect. I set to process this image and asked the lunar orbiter to take a couple more. I also asked to take a rapid burst of photographs. I waited for the compression process to complete, while waiting for the images to be retrieved. The new thumbnails showed the same skewed zigzag on the left, and a growing pattern on the right. The burst of images made me realize the zigzag was actually rotating around the Earth, pulsating. Could our atmosphere play a visual trick like this? My phone rang. It was my supervisor. My heart pressed against my chest. "Gupta, I know you're at Goddard. What the hell are you doing?" Hello sir. Sorry, I came in because I had a few things to do and I just detected an anomaly. Anomaly? I was alerted the LRO entered an intended suspension mode in several of its subsystems. But you still have the camera on. Are you taking pictures of the lunar eclipse? Yes, that was my intention originally. You know how dangerous. I was going to take a few quick pictures of Earth and then return the orbiter back to operations. Gupta, you seem to be forgetting that the moon is in total darkness, which means there's no sun for the orbiter to recharge from. No, I planned accordingly. Just a couple of pictures and then... There was a pre-programmed low-power mode subroutine that you stopped when you disrupted the other subsystems from working. I wasn't aware. The battery is not as powerful as it used to be. 6 years will do it. I know you're new, but this is just outrageous. Before you fire me, can I send you the images I took? There's something strange. Strange where? On the Earth. The ring formed with the sun. Okay. Send them only to me. I sent him the first image that I asked to compress. It had excellent quality and I hadn't even inspected it myself. He was still over the phone, but I was analyzing the burst of images that showed the pulsating motion. Do you think, sir, that it's an effect from the sun? A visual trick reflecting from our atmosphere, like an aurora borealis but visible because of the eclipse? Gupta, I'm gonna have to hang up with you. Stay where you are, okay? Okay. All of this suddenly made me very nervous. I knew I was going to get fired and I'd probably risk the entire LRO mission. Its power would run out any moment now. I was careless. So I asked the LRO to take one last picture and send it straight to compression. It was about the same time that my relatives were posting their pictures of the full bloody moon, so the angle should be perfect to understand what was happening. As I waited, I took a quick look to the picture I'd sent to my supervisor. The skewed zigzag was more detailed. It had the shape of a solenoid, emitting fire from it. At the right side, the pattern was curled. It was the same solenoid, only seen from another angle, also emitting heat. What was I seeing? It almost seemed artificial, unnatural. It had the motion of an animal, a worm-like creature moving or eating. The burst showed the solenoids rotating back and forth around the Earth, invisible in darkness, and invisible in sunlight too. Otherwise it would have been seen at the other side of the world. The phone from my station rang. Mr. Gupta, there are some gentlemen here about to enter your office. They're federal officers. I had no idea you were here illegally. I need you to tell them I was not an accomplice. Carl, what are you talking about? They asked me if you had gone through. They're armed and went on foot. Were they FBI? No, their badges said DARPA, and they had no other identification. I think they're private. Thanks, Carl. I'll tell them you knew nothing. Thank you very much, Mr. Gupta. I could hear the steps outside of my office. Heavy sneakers ready to come in on the orders of their commander. I was not aware that I had broken any laws with my stunt. Maybe I did, but arrest me? Like this? DARPA? What did they have to do with anything? Finally, the last picture finished downloading and compressing. It was the last thing that I saw before being kidnapped, and the only thing I still remember very clearly. If I could have sent that picture to the media outlet, I would have, but I was in shock. The picture showed a red tint coming from the zigzags that now wrapped the entire world. They looked like gigantic waves devouring the earth. But what was much clearer now was where the zigzags were coming from. It wasn't from the sun. It was from a fixed point in Alaska. The solenoid seemed to follow the shape of the Earth's geomagnetic field. I remember hearing a loud boom and then I fell to the ground. And now I'm here, talking to you. If you've asked me to tell you what I discovered, it's because you don't want anyone to know. So either you kill me, or you let me work with you on hard.
Quickly before the very last story that we have for you this episode, I would like to announce that we are having another flash fiction contest. Head on over to prompted.reddit.com and there will be a special prompt that is made just for the next episode that will tie in with its theme. Keep all of the responses under 100 words and make sure you get those in before the 26th of August. That will be our cutoff date so that we have time to actually decide which ones we want to read and have time to actually record them for you guys. With all of that said, we have one last story. The prompt is by Gamian123321, and the prompt response is written by Dom Prompts. A portion of people are werewolves. Due to this, everyone is required to wear a visor that blocks out the moon. Moon watching, though illegal, is a common pastime for some. We walk beneath the gentle glow of an orb we think we'd like to know, an alabaster face that lights the night, if only it was within our sight. But to shield ourselves we have concocted a gadget worn to be adopted. Upon our heads our visor sits, to keep ourselves about our wits. Wits we say, but that's not true. More like lichen, I'd liken this to. Claws and teeth to rend the flesh, with strength and speed to aid our quest. We have no fear, but still there's hope. We don the visors of which we spoke, our shields steadfast against the moon, its majesty hidden, blindness our boon. We have our laws to keep us safe, no eyes to sky when the hour is late. Though where there is laws, the breakers come, recklessness in tow, they search for fun. They venture out with hearts of ice, caring little of the price. They find their rush in the sky of night, their eyes fixed upon Earth's satellite. As they sit there, eyes of wonder, it won't take long to see their blunder. And just like that, torn asunder, it was all so fast like a crack of thunder. A howl, a snarl, meat and grizzle, left for all a grisly epistle. All it takes is one to turn, and just like that, none return. So to stem the fate of which they fell, we keep our visors without rebel. And though we wish to see our orb, its beauty and love we can't absorb, for the risk is high and we must stay safe from all the fools who dare tempt fate. That's all we have for you today. I hope that you all enjoyed this episode of Prompted. Please be sure to visit our subreddit, prompted.reddit.com, and leave feedback if you liked it. Or if you didn't like it, let us know how we can improve. We are always looking for new ideas. Until next time, good words, good writing.